The bullet had grazed her shoulder badly enough that blood soaked through her threadbare dress as Natalie Lancaster stumbled into the dusty yard of the ranch outside Goldfield, Nevada, her vision swimming in the August heat of 1883. She had been running for 3 days straight, stealing rides on freight wagons and hiding in ravines, her husband's gambling debts chasing her like vengeful ghosts made flesh in the form of 3 armed men who wanted their money one way or another. The ranch house before her looked like salvation, or perhaps just a softer place to die, and she fell to her knees in the dirt, her dark hair matted with sweat and dust, her green eyes glazed with exhaustion as the world tilted sideways. Harrison Yates had been mending fence posts when he heard the sound of someone collapsing in his yard, and he dropped his tools immediately, his long stride eating up the distance between the corral and his house. He was 32 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work under the Nevada sun, his face weathered but honest, his hands calloused but gentle as he knelt beside the woman who had fallen face first into his property. He turned her over carefully, his brown eyes widening at the blood on her shoulder and the hollows in her cheeks that spoke of days without proper food. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice deep and steady despite the alarm racing through his veins. Natalie's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on the man above her. He had kind eyes, she noticed, the sort of eyes that belonged to a man who meant what he said and said what he meant. His dark hair was cut short, practical for the heat, and there was concern etched into every line of his sun-bronzed face. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, and only a rasping sound emerged. Harrison didn't waste time with more questions. He scooped her up as carefully as he could, noting how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms despite the fact that she had to be in her mid-20s at least. He carried her into his house, kicking the door open with his boot and laying her down on his bed, the only bed in the small ranch house. He had built this place with his own hands 5 years ago, and it was simple but sturdy, with whitewashed walls and clean wooden floors that his mother would have approved of if she had lived to see it. "I need to look at that shoulder," he said, reaching for the buttons at her collar with clinical efficiency despite the color that rose in his cheeks. "I promise I'm going to be respectful, but that wound needs tending." Natalie managed a small nod, too weak to protest even if she had wanted to. The world was already fading again, gray creeping in at the edges of her vision, and she let it take her rather than fight anymore. She had been fighting for so long. When she woke again, the light had changed, slanting through the window at a lower angle that suggested late afternoon. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, hot pain, but it was clean pain, the kind that came from proper treatment rather than festering infection. She turned her head carefully and saw that someone had bandaged her shoulder with strips of what looked like a torn sheet, wrapped neat and tight. She was wearing a man's shirt, several sizes too large, and her dress was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, panic flared in her chest until she looked down and saw that she was still wearing her chemise and petticoats beneath the shirt. "You're awake." Harrison's voice came from the doorway, and she turned to see him standing there with a cup in his hands, steam rising from whatever was inside. "I made some broth. You need to get something in your stomach." "Where is my dress?" Natalie's voice came out hoarse, scratchy from disuse and thirst. "Soaking in cold water to get the bloodstains out. I gave you my shirt to keep you decent while it dries." He crossed the room and sat down in the chair he had pulled up beside the bed, holding out the cup. "Can you sit up?" Natalie tried and found that she could, though her head spun and her shoulders screamed in protest. Harrison helped her, one hand behind her back to steady her, and she took the cup with trembling hands. The broth was simple, just chicken and vegetables, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She drank it slowly, savoring every drop, aware of his eyes on her but not in a way that made her uncomfortable. He was watching her the way a doctor might watch a patient, assessing her condition rather than anything improper. "Thank you," she said when the cup was empty, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "Who shot you?" Harrison asked, his tone gentle but firm. "And are they going to come looking for you here?" Natalie closed her eyes, the shame washing over her like a wave. "My husband owed money to some men in California. Bad men. He died 6 months ago, fever took him, and they came to collect from me instead. They said I had to pay his debts or they would take payment in other ways." Her voice broke on the last words and she swallowed hard. "I ran. I've been running for weeks. I tried to steal a horse 3 days ago and they caught up to me just outside of town. One of them shot at me, but I got away in the dark." Harrison's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "How much does you owe them?" $3,000. The number was astronomical, impossible, might as well have been 3 million for all the chance she had of paying it. "I worked as a seamstress in Sacramento, but I could never make that much, not in a lifetime. $3,000 for a gambling debt." Harrison shook his head slowly. "That's blood money, pure and simple. No court in the land would hold you to a debt you didn't make." "Courts don't matter to men like that," Natalie said quietly. "They make their own laws." Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his land, at the cattle grazing in the distance and the mountains rising beyond. He had worked hard for what he had, saved every penny, built his herd from nothing. $3,000 was more than he had, but it was not so much that it was impossible. He thought about the woman in his bed, about the fear in her eyes and the desperate courage it must have taken to run, to keep running even when she was shot and bleeding and alone. "You can stay here," he said, turning back to face her. "You're safe on my land. Anyone comes looking for you, they'll have to go through me first." Natalie stared at him, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't know me. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Harrison said simply. "And because I have a sister back in Ohio who found herself in a bad situation once, and a good man helped her when he didn't have to. I figure I owe the universe a kindness returned." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks before she could stop them, hot and fast and carrying all the fear and exhaustion of the past weeks. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and Harrison crossed the room in 2 strides. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her carefully against his chest, mindful of her injured shoulder, letting her cry into his shirt while he stroked her hair with one rough hand. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Natalie cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and strangely lighter for it. When she finally pulled back, wiping at her face with shaking hands, Harrison handed her a handkerchief without comment. She took it gratefully, drying her eyes and blowing her nose, not caring that it was unladylike or that she barely knew this man. "I don't have any money," she said quietly. "I can't pay you for your help." Harrison met her eyes steadily, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip a beat despite everything. "Some things are worth more than money," he said. "You can stay here as long as you need to. When you're healed up, if you want to work to earn your keep, I could use help around the place. If you just need time to rest and figure out your next move, that's fine too. Either way, you're not going to be turned out or harmed under my roof." "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me," Natalie whispered. "Maybe I'm just tired of being alone," Harrison said, and there was a vulnerability in those words that suggested he had surprised himself by speaking them out loud. He stood up quickly, clearing his throat. You should rest more. I'll check on you in a few hours, bring you some supper." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing quietly behind him, and Natalie lay back against the pillows, her mind spinning. She had been running for so long, expecting cruelty or indifference or worse, that simple kindness felt almost surreal. She touched the bandage on her shoulder, thinking of the care he had taken, the way he had treated her with respect even when she was helpless. She thought about his eyes, brown and steady and honest, and the way her heart had reacted when he pulled her close to comfort her. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to someone showing her compassion when she desperately needed it. But deep down, in a place she was not quite ready to examine too closely, she knew it was already more than that. Over the next week, Natalie healed slowly under Harrison's careful attention. He changed her bandages twice a day, his touch always gentle and professional, though she noticed the way his hands sometimes lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. He brought her meals at regular intervals, simple but nourishing food that put color back in her cheeks and strength back in her limbs. He talked to her while she ate, telling her about his ranch and his life, his words easy and comfortable like they had known each other for years rather than days. Harrison had come to Nevada 7 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination. He had worked on other men's ranches for 2 years, saving every penny, learning the land and the business. When he had enough money, he bought this plot of land outside Goldfield, built his house with his own hands, and started his herd with 5 cows and a bull he bought at auction. Now he had nearly 100 head of cattle, and his ranch was profitable enough that he could hire help during branding season and roundup. He lived simply, worked hard, and had been content with his life if a bit lonely. "Why didn't you ever marry?" Natalie asked one evening as he sat with her while she ate the stew he had made. She was strong enough now to sit up on her own, even to walk around the room a little, though her shoulder still ached fiercely if she moved it wrong. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at his own bowl of stew as if the answer was written in the gravy. "Never found the right woman, I guess," he said finally. "I was engaged once, back in Ohio before I came west. Her name was Margaret, and she was pretty and practical and everything a man was supposed to want in a wife. But then I told her I was moving to Nevada to start a ranch, and she told me she would never leave Ohio, never leave her family and her friends for a dusty nowhere place in the desert. She asked me to choose between her and my dream. And you chose the dream," Natalie said softly. "I did." Harrison looked up at her, his brown eyes serious. "I figured if she really loved me, she would have been willing to try, or at least she would have understood why I needed to do this. When she gave me that ultimatum, I realized she didn't want me for who I was. She wanted me to be the man she had decided I should be, and those are 2 different things." Natalie nodded slowly, thinking of her own marriage, of the man who had seemed charming and steady when she married him at 21, only to reveal himself as a gambler and a drinker who cared more for cards than he did for his wife. She had stayed because that was what women did, because she had promised before God to be his wife until death parted them. When he died, she had felt guilty for the relief that washed over her, guilty that her first thought was freedom rather than grief. "My husband was not a good man," she said quietly. "I thought he was when I married him, but I was young and foolish. He lied about who he was, what he wanted. By the time I figured it out, it was too late." "It's never too late to start over," Harrison said. "That's what I learned coming west. Every day is a chance to be someone new, to build something better." "Is that what I'm doing?" Natalie asked, looking at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Starting over." "I hope so," Harrison said, and the sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. "I hope you get the chance to be whoever you want to be, without fear and without anyone trying to make you into something you're not." The conversation stayed with Natalie long after Harrison left her to sleep. She lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, thinking about starting over and second chances. She thought about the man who had taken her in without hesitation, who treated her with a respect and kindness she had never known from her husband. She thought about the way her heart beat faster when he smiled at her, the way she found herself watching the door in the hours between his visits, waiting to see him again. It was too soon, she told herself. She was vulnerable and grateful, and she was confusing those feelings for something deeper. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Harrison's face, the honesty in his eyes and the strength in his hands, and she knew she was lying to herself. By the second week, Natalie was strong enough to leave the bed for longer periods. Harrison gave her free run of the house, and she explored it with interest, noting the simple but well-made furniture, the neat kitchen with its cast iron stove, the bookshelf in the main room filled with an eclectic collection of novels and farming manuals. Everything about the house spoke of a man who valued substance over flash, who took pride in what he had built. "Would you like to see the ranch?" Harrison asked one morning after breakfast. "You're strong enough for a walk if we take it slow." Natalie agreed eagerly, desperate to see something other than the four walls of the bedroom and the main room. Harrison helped her into her dress, which he had cleaned and mended as best he could, though there was still a faint brown stain on the shoulder where her blood had soaked through. He offered her his arm, and they walked out into the bright Nevada morning together. The ranch was beautiful in its stark simplicity. The house sat on a slight rise, with a view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. There was a barn and a corral, several storage sheds, and a chicken coop that produced the eggs Harrison cooked for breakfast. Beyond the immediate ranch buildings, cattle grazed on the scrubland, hardy beasts adapted to the harsh climate. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, providing precious water in this dry land. "It's wonderful," Natalie said, and she meant it. There was something peaceful about this place, something solid and real that called to something deep inside her. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it," Harrison said, pride evident in his voice. "I hired help for the barn raising, but the house and the smaller buildings I did on my own. It took time, but I wanted to know every nail was placed right, every board was solid." They walked slowly, Harrison matching his pace to hers, and Natalie felt something unfurling in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for so long she had forgotten it was there. It was hope, she realized. Hope that maybe there was a life beyond running and fear, beyond bad marriages and impossible debts. Hope that maybe this man beside her was offering something real and true. "Harrison," she said, stopping and turning to face him. "Why did you really take me in? And please don't say it's just because it was the right thing to do. I need to know the truth." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, his brown eyes searching her face. "You want the honest truth, please." "Because from the moment I saw you lying in my yard, bleeding and broken and still fighting to stay alive, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Harrison said quietly. "Because when I carried you into my house, something in me recognized something in you, like we were two pieces that fit together. Because I have been alone for 7 years, and in 1 week of having you here, my house has felt more like a home than it ever has before." He paused, color rising in his cheeks. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Natalie Lancaster, and I know that's crazy and too fast and probably not what you want to hear, but you asked for the truth." Natalie's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "That's not crazy," she whispered. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me because the last time I trusted a man with my heart, it ended in disaster." "I'm not him," Harrison said, stepping closer and taking her good hand in his. "I won't lie to you. I won't gamble with your future, and I will never make you pay for my mistakes. I'm just a rancher who works hard and says what he means. But if you give me a chance, I will spend every day proving that I'm worthy of your trust." Natalie looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, who had shown her more kindness in 2 weeks than her husband had in 5 years of marriage. She thought about the fear that had driven her across state lines, about the men who were still out there somewhere looking for her, about the impossible debt that hung over her head like a sword. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea, all the ways it could go wrong. And then she thought about the way her heart felt when he smiled at her, and she decided that maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. "I want to give you a chance," she said. "But Harrison, those men are still out there. They won't stop looking for me. I'm putting you in danger just by being here." "Let them come," Harrison said, and there was steel in his voice now. "I meant what I said. They'll have to go through me first, and I'm not an easy man to go through." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and full of promise. Natalie kissed him back, her good arm coming up to wrap around his neck, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "We'll figure this out together," he murmured. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Natalie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and let him hold her there in the Nevada sunshine, while the cattle lowed in the distance and the wind whispered through the scrub grass. For the first time since she had started running, she let herself believe that maybe everything would be all right. The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of domestic bliss that Natalie had never experienced before. She and Harrison settled into a routine, working side by side to keep the ranch running. Her shoulder healed steadily, and as soon as she was able, she insisted on helping however she could. She cooked meals that were more elaborate than Harrison's simple bachelor fare, mended his clothes and the worn linens in the house, tended the vegetable garden that had been struggling from neglect. Harrison taught her to ride properly, starting with his most gentle mare, and she learned quickly, her natural grace translating to the saddle. They talked for hours every evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Harrison told her about his childhood in Ohio, the middle child of 5 in a farming family, about his decision to come west and the adventures he had along the way. Natalie told him about growing up in Sacramento, the daughter of a seamstress and a carpenter who had both died of cholera when she was 17, about how she had met her husband at church and thought he was the answer to her prayers for security and family. "I wanted children so badly," Natalie confessed one evening, her voice soft with old grief. "But it never happened. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I would not have wanted to bring children into that marriage, not once I knew what he really was." "You still have time," Harrison said, reaching over to take her hand. "You're only 26, Natalie. Your whole life is ahead of you." "Is it part of your vision?" she asked, looking at him with those green eyes that never failed to make his heart skip. "Children, I mean." "Is that something you want?" "With the right woman, yes," Harrison said honestly. "I always pictured this ranch as a family place, with children running around and a wife who was my partner in building something that would last. But it had to be with someone I loved, someone who loved this life as much as I do." "I'm starting to love this life," Natalie said quietly. I never thought I could be happy in such a remote place, but there is something about this land, this simplicity. I feel like I can breathe here." Harrison brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Stay," he said. "Not as a guest or someone working to earn their keep. Stay as my wife if you will have me. I know it's fast. I know we have only known each other a month, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Natalie's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears this time, tears of joy rather than pain. "I'm still married," she whispered. "Legally, I mean. My husband is dead, but I never filed the papers to make it official. And those men, Harrison, they are still out there." "Then we will go to town tomorrow and file whatever papers need filing," Harrison said firmly. "And as for those men, we will deal with them if they come. But Natalie, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to marry me out of pity or because I think you need protection. I'm asking because I love you, because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, because you make me happier than I ever thought possible." "Yes," Natalie said, the word bursting out of her like it had been waiting to be spoken. "Yes, I will marry you, Harrison Yates. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and I don't care that it's fast or unconventional or any of the things people might say. I know what I feel, and I know you're nothing like him, and I know I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life and see your face." Harrison pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy and breathless and achingly alive. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing, giddy with the joy of it, with the impossible fortune of finding each other against all odds. "We should do this properly," Harrison said, pulling back reluctantly. "I want to court you right, want to give you a proper proposal and a wedding you can remember. You just proposed to me under a Nevada sunset with my hand in yours and love in your eyes," Natalie said, smiling through her tears. "I cannot imagine anything more perfect than that." They went to town the next day, riding in Harrison's wagon for the hour-long journey to Goldfield. It was Natalie's first time seeing the town, and she looked around with interest at the dusty Main Street, the wooden buildings, the people going about their business. Goldfield was still a small town in 1883, not yet the bustling mining center it would become in a few decades, but it had everything a frontier town needed: a general store, a saloon, a church, and a sheriff's office. Their first stop was the county clerk's office to file the death certificate for Natalie's husband. The clerk was a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Henderson, who looked at Natalie with obvious disapproval when she explained that she needed to formalize her widowhood. "You should have done this months ago," Mrs. Henderson said primly. "It's not proper to let these things languish." "I was dealing with other matters," Natalie said, keeping her voice level despite the flush of embarrassment in her cheeks. "Can you help me or not, Mrs.?" Henderson sniffed, but pulled out the necessary forms, and Natalie filled them out carefully, her hand shaking only slightly as she wrote her dead husband's name one final time. Harrison stood beside her the whole time, his presence solid and reassuring, and when it was done, when the clerk stamped the papers and filed them away, Natalie felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Now you're truly free," Harrison murmured as they left the office, and Natalie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Their second stop was the general store, where Harrison insisted on buying Natalie fabric for a new dress. "You can't get married in a blood-stained dress," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Pick out something you like." Natalie chose a soft blue calico that reminded her of the sky over the ranch, along with white lace for trim and new thread for her sewing kit. The storekeeper, a friendly man named Mr. Peterson, wrapped everything up carefully and chatted easily about the weather and the cattle prices while Harrison paid. It was all so normal, so wonderfully ordinary that Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again. They were loading the supplies into the wagon when a man's voice called out behind them. "Well, I will be damned if it is not Natalie Lancaster herself." Natalie froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She turned slowly, and her worst nightmare was standing 10 feet away. Jack Morrison was one of the men her husband had owed money to, a wiry man with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached above his mouth. He was dressed like any other cowboy in town, but there was a hardness to him that spoke of violence barely contained. "I've been looking for you, Natalie," Jack said, walking closer with deliberate slowness. "You led us on quite a chase." Harrison stepped between them immediately, his body a barrier between Natalie and the threat. "The lady doesn't want to talk to you," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. Jack's eyes flicked to Harrison, assessing him, then back to Natalie. "This your new man? Does he know you're a thief? Does he know you owe me $3,000? "She doesn't owe you anything," Harrison said flatly. "Her husband's debts died with him. No court would say otherwise." "I don't care what a court would say," Jack said, his hand moving to rest on the gun at his hip. "I want my money, and I'm going to get it one way or another." "You're not getting anything from her," Harrison said, and now his own hand was near his gun, though he had not drawn it yet. "Not money, not favors, not so much as a word. Now I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out of town before this gets unpleasant." A crowd was gathering, people stopping to watch the confrontation with the avid interest of small-town residents starved for entertainment. Natalie saw the sheriff, a thick-set man named Tom Bradley, pushing through the crowd, his hand on his own gun. "What's going on here?" Sheriff Bradley asked, his eyes moving between Harrison, Natalie, and Jack. "This man is threatening my fiancée," Harrison said before Jack could speak, "claiming she owes him money for debts her dead husband left behind, trying to intimidate her into paying them." Sheriff Bradley's expression hardened. "That true?" he asked Jack. "Her husband owed me money," Jack said, his voice tight with frustration. $3,000 for gambling debts. That debt doesn't just disappear." "Actually, it does," Sheriff Bradley said. "Nevada law is clear on this. Debts incurred by a husband without the wife's knowledge or consent die with him. Mrs. Lancaster doesn't owe you a penny." "That's horseshit," Jack spat. "What about honor? What about a man's word? What about the law?" Sheriff Bradley countered. "You got a legal contract. Anything in writing that says Mrs. Lancaster herself agreed to these debts?" Jack's silence was answer enough. Sheriff Bradley nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. Now I'm going to give you a choice, Mr. Morrison. You can get on your horse right now and leave town, or I can arrest you for threatening a woman and disturbing the peace. What's it going to be?" Jack looked at Natalie with such hatred that she flinched despite Harrison's protective bulk between them. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You can hide behind the law and your new man all you want, but I know where you are now, and I always collect what I'm owed." "That sounded like a threat to me," Sheriff Bradley said, his voice dangerously soft. "That's enough. You're under arrest." What happened next happened fast. Jack drew his gun, but Harrison was faster, tackling Natalie to the ground and covering her body with his as the first shot rang out. Sheriff Bradley returned fire, and Jack went down hard, clutching his leg and screaming. Two deputies materialized from the crowd, disarming Jack and hauling him roughly to his feet while blood poured from his thigh. "Get him to the doctor, then lock him up," Sheriff Bradley ordered. He turned to Harrison and Natalie, who were slowly getting to their feet. "You two all right?" "We're fine," Harrison said, though his hands were shaking as he checked Natalie over for injuries. "Thank you, Sheriff. Just doing my job." Sheriff Bradley looked at Natalie with something like sympathy in his eyes. "I'm sorry you got mixed up in this, madam. For what it's worth, Morrison will be in jail for at least a few months for that stunt. Assault with a deadly weapon, threatening a woman, disturbing the peace. I will throw the book at him." "What about the other two?" Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was traveling with two other men when they came after me in California." "You know their names?" Sheriff Bradley asked, pulling out a small notebook. Natalie thought hard, trying to remember the few times she had heard them speak to each other. "One was called Pete, I think. The other they called Slim. I never learned last names." "I'll send telegrams to the sheriffs in the neighboring counties," Sheriff Bradley promised. "Let them know to be on the lookout for two men matching those descriptions and asking questions about you. In the meantime, you stay close to home and keep your eyes open. If you see anything suspicious, you send word immediately." Harrison thanked the sheriff again, then guided Natalie back to the wagon. His hands were gentle as he helped her up onto the seat, and he held her close for a long moment before climbing up beside her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing what had happened, what it meant. "I brought this to your door," Natalie said finally, her voice thick with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Harrison, you could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Harrison said firmly. "And neither were you. Natalie, look at me." He waited until she turned to meet his eyes. "I knew there were risks when I asked you to stay. I knew there might be trouble. I chose to face it anyway because you're worth it. Do you understand? You are worth any risk, any danger, any trouble that might come." "I don't deserve you," Natalie whispered. "That's not for you to decide," Harrison said. "I'm choosing you, Natalie Lancaster. Every day, with everything I have, I'm choosing you. The only question is whether you're going to choose me back, or if you're going to run again." Natalie looked at him, at this man who had literally thrown himself between her and a bullet, who had defended her to the law and meant it when he said she was worth it. She thought about running, about the instinct that had kept her alive for so long, the voice that told her to protect herself first and damn the consequences. Then she thought about what she would be running from. Not danger this time, but love. Real, honest, terrifying love that asked her to be brave in a completely different way. "I choose you," she said, and this time her voice was steady and sure. "I'm not running anymore, Harrison. Whatever comes, we face it together." Harrison let out a breath he did not know he had been holding and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head as he guided the horses toward home. Home, Natalie thought, and realized that was exactly what the ranch had become. Not just a place to hide or a temporary refuge, but home in the truest sense of the word. The incident in town changed things between them in subtle ways. There was an urgency now, a recognition that life was short and uncertain and should not be wasted. Harrison worked on building an addition to the house, a second bedroom that could serve as a nursery someday. He said, though the real reason was to give Natalie a space that was truly hers, a place where she could sew or read or just be alone when she needed it. Natalie threw herself into making the ranch house a home, sewing curtains for the windows and a proper quilt for their bed, planting flowers around the porch that brought color to the stark Nevada landscape. They talked to the pastor in town, a young man named Reverend Samuel Holt, who had come west from Connecticut with more enthusiasm than sense, and scheduled their wedding for October, 2 months away. It would be a simple ceremony, just the two of them and whatever neighbors wanted to attend, but Natalie worked on her dress with loving care, determined that she would marry Harrison Yates in something beautiful. The days passed in hard work and quiet happiness. Harrison taught Natalie the ins and outs of running a ranch, showed her how to doctor sick cattle and which plants were safe for grazing, and how to read the sky for coming weather. Natalie taught Harrison how to cook things more complicated than stew and beans, how to properly mend his clothes so they lasted longer, how to make a house feel like more than just a structure. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, the comfortable intimacy of two people building a life together. At night, they sat on the porch and talked about the future, about expanding the herd and maybe buying the neighboring plot of land if it came up for sale, about children and what they would name them and how they would raise them. Harrison wanted sons to teach ranching, but he wanted daughters too, he said, little girls with their mother's green eyes and spirit. Natalie found herself dreaming about those hypothetical children with a longing that was almost physical, imagining the house full of noise and laughter and life. "Do you think we're crazy?" she asked one evening as they watched the sun set in shades of orange and pink. "Getting married so fast, planning a future when we have only known each other a few months." "Probably," Harrison said, pulling her close against his side. "But I don't care. When you know, and I know you're the woman I want to spend my life with." "I know it too," Natalie said softly. "It scares me sometimes how much I love you. What if something happens? What if those men come back? What if—" "No what ifs," Harrison interrupted gently. "We can't live our lives in fear of things that might happen. We just have to trust that we're strong enough to handle whatever comes together." Natalie nodded and let herself relax into his embrace, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap, and the particular smell of the desert after sunset. She thought about how far she had come from the terrified woman who had collapsed in this man's yard, bleeding and broken. That woman had been running from death, but this woman, the one she was becoming, was running toward life. The wedding day arrived bright and clear, a perfect October morning with just enough chill in the air to remind everyone that winter was coming. Natalie woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement, and put on the blue calico dress she had made. It was simpler than the dress she had worn for her first wedding, but it was infinitely more precious because she had made it herself, every stitch placed with love and hope for the future. Mrs. Henderson from the county clerk's office had softened somewhat toward Natalie and had agreed to help her get ready, along with two other women from town. Mary Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, and Ellen Bradley, the sheriff's sister. They fussed over Natalie's hair, pinning it up in a soft style that framed her face, and Ellen produced a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers she had gathered that morning. "You look beautiful," Mary said with genuine warmth. "Harrison Yates is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Natalie said softly, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The ceremony took place in the small church in Goldfield, and if the attendance was sparse, no one seemed to mind. Sheriff Bradley was there with his sister, the Petersons came, and a few of Harrison's neighboring ranchers showed up with their families. Jack Morrison was still in jail awaiting trial, and there had been no sign of his companions, which meant everyone could relax and enjoy the occasion without fear. Natalie walked down the aisle alone, with no father to give her away and no family to witness this moment, but she did not feel alone. Harrison was waiting for her at the altar, looking handsome in his best suit, his eyes bright with emotion as he watched her approach. When she reached him and took his hand, she felt a rightness settle over her like a benediction. Reverend Holt kept the ceremony short and sweet, speaking about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of partnership and mutual respect. When it came time for the vows, Harrison's voice was steady and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Natalie for all the days of his life. Natalie's voice wavered only slightly as she made the same promises, knowing that this time, with this man, they were promises that would be kept. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Holt said with a smile. "Harrison, you may kiss your bride." Harrison pulled Natalie close and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one pair of eyes in the small congregation. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling so broadly it almost hurt, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by all the neighbors. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, vegetable dishes and pies, and even a small wedding cake that Mary Peterson had baked. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing as the afternoon stretched into evening, the celebration taking on the warm, informal joy that characterized frontier life. Natalie danced with Harrison, with Sheriff Bradley, with Mr. Peterson and several of the neighboring ranchers, her feet moving to the music and her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. Not the absence of problems or fear, but the presence of love and community and purpose. This was what it meant to be home. As the sun began to set, and the guests started to take their leave, Harrison and Natalie stood together on their porch, waving goodbye and accepting final congratulations. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road and they were finally alone, Harrison turned to his wife with a look in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Hello, Mrs. Yates," he said softly. "Hello, Mr. Yates," Natalie replied, smiling up at him. Harrison swept her up in his arms, carrying her over the threshold of their home in the traditional way, and Natalie laughed with pure joy. He kicked the door shut behind them and carried her to their bedroom, laying her down on the bed with a gentleness that belied the passion in his eyes. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Natalie whispered, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Show me, Harrison, show me what love is supposed to feel like." And he did, with a tenderness and passion that erased every bad memory of her first marriage, that taught her what it meant to be cherished and desired in equal measure. They came together as husband and wife in body as they already were in heart, and Natalie thought that if she died in that moment, she would die completely happy. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. Natalie threw herself into life on the ranch, learning everything Harrison could teach her and discovering that she had a real talent for ranching. She could ride as well as any man now, could rope a stray calf and doctor an injured cow with confidence. She took over the management of the ranch's finances, discovering that she had a head for numbers that Harrison lacked, and organized their accounts with a precision that impressed him. Together they expanded the herd, buying 20 more head of cattle at auction with money they had saved carefully over the winter. They hired 2 ranch hands for the busy summer months, young men named Tom and Jim, who were hard workers and respectful of Natalie, despite the occasional surprise of taking orders from a woman. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and when Roundup came in the fall of 1884, they sold their cattle for a profit that exceeded even Harrison's optimistic projections. "We could buy that neighboring land now," Harrison said one evening as they reviewed their accounts. "Old man Johnson has been talking about selling for months. If we bought his property, we could almost double our grazing land. Or we could save it," Natalie said, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on her still flat stomach, "for medical expenses and such." Harrison's eyes widened, darting from her face to her hand and back again. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Natalie smiled, unable to contain her joy any longer. "I'm pregnant, Harrison. The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby next spring." Harrison let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he finally set her down, his eyes were wet with tears, and he cupped her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "We're going to have a baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Natalie, you have made me the happiest man alive." "We made this baby together," Natalie said, her own eyes bright with happy tears. "I cannot wait to meet him or her, to see who they will become." The pregnancy was not always easy. Natalie suffered from severe morning sickness in the first months, and Harrison hovered over her with anxious concern, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her back when she was ill. As winter set in and her belly began to swell, she found the physical work of ranching increasingly difficult, though she pushed herself perhaps harder than she should have. "You need to rest more," Harrison said one afternoon after finding her mucking out stalls, a job that was far too heavy for a woman 6 months pregnant. "The ranch will not fall apart if you take a break." "I'm pregnant, not broken," Natalie said, but she let him take the pitchfork from her hands and lead her back to the house. "I hate feeling useless." "You could never be useless," Harrison said firmly. "You're growing our child, Natalie. That's the most important work there is." Natalie knew he was right, but it was hard to sit still when she had spent the last year being so active. She compromised by taking over more of the indoor work, cooking and cleaning and sewing baby clothes from soft fabric she ordered from a catalog. Harrison built a cradle out of smooth pine, sanding it until there was not a single rough edge that could harm delicate baby skin. They talked for hours about names, finally settling on Henry for a boy and Nora for a girl, names that honored both their families without the pain of using their parents' exact names. Spring came late to Nevada in 1885, but when it finally arrived, it brought warmth and new life to the ranch. Natalie's belly was huge now, and she moved with the careful waddle of a woman very near her time. The doctor had given her a due date in mid-April, but as March turned to April and April wore on, there was still no sign of the baby. "I feel like I have been pregnant forever," Natalie complained one evening as Harrison rubbed her swollen feet. "This baby is never going to come out." "Soon," Harrison said soothingly, though he was just as anxious as she was. "Any day now." The baby decided to make an appearance 3 days later, in the early hours of a cool April morning. Natalie woke Harrison with a hand on his shoulder and a calm voice that belied the pain she was already in. "The baby is coming," she said. "You need to ride for the doctor." Harrison was up and dressed in record time, but Natalie stopped him at the door. "Send Tom or Jim for the doctor," she said. "I need you here with me. Please, Harrison, don't leave me alone." Harrison looked torn, but he could see the fear behind her brave words, and he nodded. He ran to the bunkhouse and woke Tom, giving him rapid instructions to ride to town and bring back the doctor as fast as possible. Then he returned to Natalie, taking her hand in his and holding on tight. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The labor was long and difficult, as first labors often are. Natalie bore it with as much courage as she could muster, but there were moments when she screamed with pain, when she gripped Harrison's hand so hard she left bruises, when she was sure she could not do this for one more minute. Harrison stayed by her side through all of it, mopping her forehead with cool water, whispering words of encouragement, being the anchor she needed. The doctor arrived after what felt like an eternity, though it had only been 3 hours. Dr. Williams was a gruff but competent man in his 50s, and he examined Natalie with brisk efficiency before announcing that everything was progressing normally, if slowly. "First babies take their time," he said. "Could be hours yet. Just breathe through the pains and push when I tell you to push." It was another 4 hours before the baby finally decided to make an appearance. Natalie was exhausted beyond measure, her hair soaked with sweat and her body trembling with effort. But when Dr. Williams told her to push, she bore down with the last of her strength. Harrison held her through it all, murmuring words of love and encouragement, and when the baby finally slipped free with a rush of blood and fluid, when that first lusty cry filled the room, they both wept with relief and joy. "It's a boy, Doctor," Williams announced, cleaning the baby quickly and wrapping him in a soft blanket before placing him in Natalie's arms. "A healthy boy, about 7 pounds by the look of him. Congratulations, Mrs. Yates." Natalie looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, Henry," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Harrison leaned over them both, his own face wet with tears as he touched his son's soft cheek with one gentle finger. "He's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Natalie, he's absolutely perfect, Doctor." Williams finished his work, seeing to Natalie and making sure the afterbirth came away cleanly, giving her instructions on caring for herself and the baby. Harrison barely heard him, so focused was he on his wife and son, on the miracle of new life that had just entered his home. When the doctor finally left, collecting his fee and promising to check back in a week, Harrison climbed into the bed beside Natalie, careful not to jostle her or the baby, and wrapped his arms around them both. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for my son, for our family, for everything." Natalie turned her head to kiss him softly. "Thank you for choosing me," she said. "For saving me when I had nothing, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible." "We gave each other that," Harrison said. "Now we get to give it to him too." They lay there together as the sun rose outside, bathing the room in soft golden light, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. It was the beginning of everything, Natalie thought. The beginning of their family, the life they would build together. All the moments of joy and sorrow and ordinary magic that lay ahead. It was not the life she had planned, not the one she had imagined when she was a young girl dreaming of her future. It was better. The years that followed were full and rich in the way that truly lived lives are. Henry grew from a tiny baby into a sturdy toddler with his father's brown eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. He learned to walk chasing chickens around the yard, learned to talk demanding stories from his mother, and rides on his father's shoulders. When he was 2, Natalie became pregnant again, and 9 months later they welcomed a daughter they named Nora, who had red hair like Harrison's mother and a temperament as sweet as summer rain. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. They did eventually buy the Johnson property, expanding their grazing land significantly, and increasing their herd to nearly 300 head of cattle. Harrison hired more hands to help with the increased workload, and Natalie managed them all with a firm but fair hand that earned their respect and loyalty. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Natalie and Harrison still sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the desert. Sometimes they talked about their day, about problems that needed solving or plans for the future. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in each other's presence. And sometimes Harrison would turn to Natalie with love in his eyes and say, "Do you remember the day you came here? I remember collapsing in your yard more dead than alive," Natalie would say with a smile. "I remember thinking you looked like an angel, but that could not be right because angels did not live in Nevada. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Harrison would reply. "And I was right about that." "You saved my life," Natalie would say, and this was always where the conversation went, like a catechism they could not help but repeat. "You saved mine right back," Harrison would answer. "This ranch was just a place before you came. You made it a home." And Natalie would lean into his side, breathing in the scent of him that had become so familiar and so precious. And think about the words she had spoken on that desperate day when she had nothing to offer. "I cannot pay you." Harrison's response had changed everything. Some things are worth more than money. He had been right. Love was worth more than money. Family was worth more than money. The life they had built together, with all its struggles and joys, its ordinary moments and extraordinary turning points, was worth more than all the money in the world. Natalie had come to his ranch with nothing but the clothes on her back and a bullet wound in her shoulder, running from a past that threatened to destroy her. Harrison had given her safety, yes, and protection. But more than that, he had given her belief in herself, in the possibility of happiness, in the idea that she deserved good things. She had given him things too, though it took her longer to understand what they were. She had given him partnership, someone to share the burden and the joy of this hard life. She had given him family, children to carry on his name and his legacy. She had given him her heart, wholly and completely, trusting him with the battered pieces of it and letting him show her they could be made whole again. When Henry was 5 and Nora was 3, Natalie became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was easier than the first two, and when her time came, she labored for only a few hours before delivering another healthy boy they named Joseph. Harrison joked that they were building their own ranch crew, children who would grow up knowing this land and this life from the ground up. "We should probably stop at 3, Natalie said when Joseph was a few months old, nursing him while Harrison read a story to the older children. "Unless you want to have to build another addition to the house." "I would build 100 additions if that is what you wanted," Harrison said, but he grinned to show he was teasing. 3 is a good number, though. A nice, solid, manageable number. But life had other plans, as it often does. 2 years after Joseph's birth, Natalie found herself pregnant again, this time with twins. The pregnancy was difficult, with Natalie confined to bed for the last 2 months to prevent early labor, and Harrison nearly wore himself out trying to manage the ranch, care for the 3 older children, and look after his wife. But when the twins finally arrived, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Sarah, the joy of 2 more healthy babies made all the struggle worthwhile. 5 children, Harrison said wonderingly as he held Sarah while Natalie nursed Samuel. "We have 5 children, Natalie. Our house is going to be chaos for the next 20 years. "Beautiful chaos," Natalie said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "The best kind of chaos there is." And it was. The years that followed were filled with noise and laughter, with scraped knees and lost teeth, with birthday celebrations and Christmas mornings, with the million small moments that make up a childhood. Henry grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and spent every spare moment following his father around, absorbing everything Harrison could teach him. Nora was gentle and artistic, always drawing or making up stories, content to spend hours exploring the desert and collecting interesting rocks and plants. Joseph was the adventurer, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries, giving his parents gray hairs with his daring exploits. The twins were inseparable, Samuel quiet and thoughtful, Sarah bright and bubbly, 2 halves of a whole. Natalie watched her children grow with a wonder that never faded. She thought often of the woman she had been when she first came to this place, terrified and wounded and certain she had no future at all. That woman would not believe this life, these children, this deep and abiding happiness. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Natalie wondered what would have happened if she had not stumbled into Harrison's yard that day, if she had collapsed somewhere else, or if a different person had found her. The thought always made her shudder. Her whole life had hinged on that moment, on the kindness of a stranger who became the love of her life. As the children grew older and more independent, Natalie and Harrison found themselves with more time to focus on each other again. They took evening rides together, just the two of them, exploring the land they had worked so hard to build. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the deep knowledge of each other that came from years of true partnership. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they came together with a passion that had not dimmed with time or familiarity, but had deepened into something richer and more profound. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day," Harrison told her one night as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of lovemaking. "I did not think that was possible, but it is." "I know what you mean," Natalie murmured, tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "Every year, every day with you, I discover new reasons to love you, new depths to what I feel. It is like falling in love over and over again." "That is what I want," Harrison said seriously. "To keep falling in love with you, over and over, until we are old and gray and our children are grown with children of their own." "We are already gray," Natalie teased, running her fingers through his hair, which was indeed showing threads of silver at the temples. "Then, until we are ancient and gray," Harrison amended with a laugh. "Until we are so old we forget each other's names and have to introduce ourselves again." "I would never forget your name," Natalie said softly. "Harrison Yates, the rancher who told me some things are worth more than money, who showed me what love really means. I will remember you until my dying breath and beyond." Time moved on, as it always does, bringing change and growth and new challenges. The children grew from babies to toddlers to children to young adults, each finding their own path in the world. Henry took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a talent for management that made his father proud. Nora went away to teachers' college in San Francisco, the first in the family to pursue higher education, and came back to teach in the one-room schoolhouse in Goldfield. Joseph joined the cavalry for a few years, seeking adventure beyond the ranch, but eventually came home, settling down with a local girl and starting his own smaller ranch on a portion of the land Harrison and Natalie gave him. The twins were the last to leave home, heading off to university together in 1910. Samuel wanted to study agriculture, to bring new scientific methods to ranching, while Sarah was determined to become a nurse. When they left, the house suddenly seemed too quiet, too empty, and Natalie found herself wandering the rooms like a ghost, missing the chaos and noise of her full house. "They'll come back," Harrison assured her, pulling her close on the porch where they still sat most evenings. "Maybe not to live, but they will visit, and there will be grandchildren soon enough, I imagine. Nora is courting that nice young man from the bank, and I would not be surprised if Henry proposes to Emma Wilson before the year is out." He was right, of course. Nora married her banker that fall, and Henry married Emma in the spring. Within a few years, there were grandchildren, tiny voices calling them grandmother and grandfather, small hands reaching for them, the cycle of life continuing in its eternal pattern. Natalie discovered that being a grandmother was a different kind of joy. All the sweetness of children without the constant responsibility, the pleasure of spoiling them, and then sending them home to their parents. The ranch remained successful, adapting to the changing times as the 20th century brought new technologies and methods. They installed a telephone line in 1912, and Natalie marveled at being able to talk to her children even when they were miles away. They bought a truck in 1915, Harrison learning to drive the newfangled contraption with more curses than Natalie had heard from him in years. The world was changing rapidly, becoming more modern and connected, but the core of their life remained the same: the land, the cattle, each other. In 1917, when America entered the Great War, Joseph enlisted again despite being in his 30s with a wife and 2 children. Natalie was terrified the whole time he was gone, praying every night for his safe return. When he came home in 1919, older and quieter but mercifully whole, she held him like she had when he was a baby and cried with relief. Through all of it, through every joy and sorrow and ordinary day, Harrison and Natalie remained each other's greatest constant. They grew old together, their hair turning fully gray and then white, their bodies accumulating the aches and pains of a life lived hard and full. But Harrison still looked at Natalie like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and Natalie still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. The love between them had not just endured, it had grown deeper and stronger, like roots that sink into the earth and anchor against any storm. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, their children threw them a party at the ranch. All 5 of them came, bringing spouses and children, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. There was food and music and dancing, just like their wedding day, and Natalie found herself thinking about how far they had come. Harrison took her hand and led her away from the party for a few moments, walking out to the spot where she had first collapsed in his yard 42 years before. "You remember?" he asked, and she knew exactly what he meant. "Every detail," Natalie said. "I remember thinking I was dying. I remember opening my eyes and seeing you and thinking maybe I had already died and you were an angel come to take me to heaven." "Heaven was right here," Harrison said, looking around at their land, their life. "We built it together, you and I." "We did," Natalie agreed. "And it has been better than anything I ever dreamed of." Harrison pulled something from his pocket, a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I got you something. It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Natalie opened it carefully and found a simple gold locket inside. She opened the locket and saw 2 tiny photographs, one of her and Harrison on their wedding day, young and bright with hope, and one taken just last year, the 2 of them older and grayer but with the same love in their eyes. "So you can carry both versions of us with you," Harrison said. "The young fools we were and the old fools we have become." "We are not fools," Natalie said, but she was crying as she fastened the locket around her neck. "We are the luckiest people in the world." "That we are," Harrison agreed, and he kissed her there under the Nevada sky, with the sounds of their children and grandchildren drifting from the house, and it felt like a promise renewed. They had chosen each other over and over again, every day for 40 years, and they would keep choosing each other for whatever time they had left, as they grew older still, into their 70s, and then their 80s. Natalie and Harrison slowed down considerably. Henry ran the ranch now, with his own sons helping, but Harrison still went out every day to check on things, unable to fully let go of the work that had defined so much of his life. Natalie spent her days sewing and reading, playing with her great-grandchildren when they visited, writing letters to her children and grandchildren scattered across Nevada and California. They still sat on the porch every evening, though, holding hands and watching the sunset, the ritual they had maintained for more than half a century. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, but always they were together, the way they had been for so long that Natalie could not remember what it felt like to be alone. Harrison died on a soft spring morning in 1935, in his sleep with Natalie beside him in the bed they had shared for 50 years. He was 84 years old, and he had lived a good, full life, but his death still struck Natalie like a physical blow. She held his cooling hand and cried the bitter tears of a woman who had lost half of herself, who could not imagine facing a world without him in it. The funeral was large, attended by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by neighbors and friends and business associates. People spoke about Harrison's honesty, his integrity, his kindness. They talked about the ranch he had built, the family he had raised, the difference he had made in their community. And Natalie listened to it all, proud of the man she had loved, but also achingly aware that the words, however true, could not capture the fullness of who he was. They could not describe the way he had saved her life in every way that mattered, the way he had loved her with unwavering devotion through good times and hard times, the way he had been her best friend and her partner, and her reason for getting up every morning. In the months after Harrison's death, Natalie moved through her days like a woman underwater, everything muffled and distant. Her children tried to convince her to come live with one of them, but she refused. This ranch was her home, the place where she had found love and built a life, and she would not leave it even if Harrison was no longer there with her. But he was there, in a way. She felt his presence in every corner of the house, in every blade of grass and fence post on the ranch. She heard his voice in the wind, felt his hand in hers when she sat on the porch in the evenings. And slowly, painfully, she found a way to keep living, to find moments of joy among the grief. Her grandchildren visited often, and their bright young voices helped fill the silence. Her children called and wrote, their love a lifeline that kept her tethered to the world. One evening, about a year after Harrison's death, Natalie sat on the porch watching the sunset alone. She touched the locket she still wore around her neck, opening it to look at the two photographs of her and Harrison. She thought about the day they met, about the journey that had brought her to his door. She thought about his words, the ones that had changed everything. Some things are worth more than money. You were right, she whispered to the empty air, to the memory of the man she loved. Love is worth more than money. Family is worth more than money. All the years I had with you were worth more than all the riches in the world. Thank you, my darling. Thank you for choosing me. The wind rustled through the desert scrub, and Natalie could have sworn she heard Harrison's voice on it, warm and loving. Thank you for choosing me back. Natalie lived for 5 more years after Harrison's death, each one a little harder than the last, as her body grew frail, and her mind occasionally wandered into the past. But even in her final days, when her children gathered around her bed in the ranch house where she had spent the best years of her life, her mind was clear enough to recognize them, to smile at them, to tell them she loved them. "Tell me about when you met Father," Nora said, holding her mother's hand gently. Natalie smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "I was running from death," she said softly, "and I stumbled into life instead. I came to this place with nothing, wounded and terrified, and your father took me in. He saved me, not just from the men who were chasing me, but from myself. He showed me what love was supposed to be, what it meant to be chosen and cherished and valued for who you really are. He loved you so much," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I loved him," Natalie said. "More than words can express. He was the best man I ever knew, and he gave me all of you. What more could anyone ask for?" She died that night, peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 82. Her children buried her next to Harrison on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Natalie Lancaster Yates, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She found home where she found love." The ranch stayed in the family for generations after that, passed down from parent to child, a living legacy of the love between Harrison and Natalie. New generations grew up hearing the story of how their great-great-grandmother had stumbled into their great-great-grandfather's yard, bleeding and desperate, and how he had taken her in with kindness that became love. They heard about the words he spoke when she whispered that she could not pay him, Some things are worth more than money, and they understood, as each generation learned the story anew, that those words held a truth that transcended time and circumstance. Love was worth more than money. Family was worth more than money. Honor and kindness and compassion were worth more than money. The things that truly mattered in life could not be bought or sold, could not be measured in dollars and cents. They could only be given freely, from one heart to another, and in the giving, both hearts were enriched beyond measure. That was the legacy Harrison and Natalie left behind. Not just the ranch with its cattle and land, but the understanding that a life well lived was a life filled with love, that true wealth was measured in relationships and memories, in children and grandchildren, in the moments of connection that made existence meaningful. They had started with nothing but need and compassion, and they had built an empire of the heart that would endure long after they were gone. Their love story became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. That strangers could become lovers, that mercy could transform into passion, that a woman running for her life could find a home in the most unexpected place. That sometimes, when the world seemed cruel and hopeless, there were still good people willing to help for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when this life is done, Harrison and Natalie were together again, young and strong and whole, riding across endless desert under eternal sunset, their hands linked and their hearts joined forever. They had found each other against impossible odds, had built a life and a love that transcended circumstance, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the money, not the ranch, not even the children and grandchildren, precious as they were. What mattered was that they had loved each other truly and completely, and that love had made everything else possible. Some things, Harrison had said, are worth more than money. He had been talking about helping a stranger in need, but the truth of those words went deeper than he could have known in that moment. Love was worth more than money. Trust was worth more than money. The courage to take a chance on someone, to open your heart even when it had been broken before, to believe that happiness was possible, that was worth more than all the gold in all the mines of Nevada. Natalie had come to Harrison with nothing to offer but herself, wounded and desperate and certain she had no future. Harrison had looked at her and seen worth beyond measure, potential beyond price. He had given her shelter and safety, yes, but more than that, he had given her belief in herself, in the possibility of love, in the chance to start over and become someone new. And she had given him the same in return, filling his solitary life with warmth and partnership, showing him that the home he had built with his hands could become a home of the heart with the right person to share it. That was their story, the tale of two broken people who found wholeness in each other, who built a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a love story, yes, but it was more than that. It was a testament to the power of kindness, to the possibility of redemption, to the idea that it is never too late to find happiness if you are brave enough to reach for it. And it all started with a woman who whispered she could not pay, and a rancher who said some things are worth more than money.